Okay, I think we are ready to start. Welcome and thank you all for joining us this evening for what we hope will be the first of an annual meeting co-sponsored by the Baker Institute, by the Texas Medical Center's Innovation Institute, and by Ignite Healthcare Network. I'm Aisha McCracken. I am the founder of Ignite Healthcare Network. We're a committee of the Greater Houston Women's Chamber of Commerce that serves as a platform engaging dynamic executive women to build relationships, generate provocative ideas, thoughts, and solutions, really targeting to impact the future of healthcare. We're about 60 women who are in very senior roles in health systems, in venture-backed companies, in academia, really crossing a broad cross-section of healthcare. We're fortunate to have Dr. Vivian Ho among our members. So Vivian, a nationally recognized health economist and a great friend. Vivian, thank you for making this evening possible. And so Houston, what brought us here this evening? Houston's an incredible city. We've got tremendous wealth and great risk-taking when it comes to healthcare. We have entrepreneurs who've been incredibly successful investing in the energy space, investing in utilities. And we also are an incredibly philanthropic community. So when we look just across the street, we have the world's largest medical complex, and annually the philanthropic support given to those institutions from our community is significant. Yet, we have an issue that we hope to be able to get some insights in our conversation this evening. Houston can be found near the bottom of a list of 25 cities surveyed in a U.S. Chamber of Commerce study published last October called Innovation That Matters. The report ranks cities by invested dollars in what's now called the next wave digital economy. Investment in healthcare plays big in this space. At the top of the list is San Francisco, Boston, Philadelphia, San Diego, and up the street, Austin. So this evening, what we look forward to learning is lessons from Palo Alto and the San Francisco experience. Our guest, Lisa Suennen, joins us from Palo Alto. Lisa, we appreciate you making the trip to warm, muggy Houston, Texas. And Lisa serves as Senior Managing Director of GE Ventures, leading the firm's healthcare venture fund. She's also a managing partner at Venture Valkyrie, a media and publishing firm, and founder of C-Sweetener, a nonprofit company that focuses on matching women new to the healthcare C-suite with experienced mentors. Lisa has significant experience in the healthcare venture space, having worked with other venture capital firms, as well as being an entrepreneur herself. And in her spare time, she serves on various boards and organizations to truly amplify her experience and influence in shaping the future of healthcare. So as I was preparing for this introduction and this session, I was looking into the companies and the work that Lisa does and just kind of looking online. And I happened upon her most recent blog entry. With all that Lisa does, and as busy as she is professionally, her most recent blog entry was about her daughter's graduation from USC just this weekend. So I just wanted to say congratulations to your daughter, yet another accomplishment for her mother as well. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Lisa and Vivian. Thank you both.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Aisha, and thank you all for coming to this discussion tonight, which is a little, of course it is healthcare, but it's a little bit different from what we do at the Baker Institute, which is what happens when you have a collaboration like this. Welcome, Lisa, to
Thank you. Thanks so much, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Great to be here.
Is this your first time here?
To this building, yes, but not to Houston. I've been here many times before.
Okay, yeah. So we apologize about the weather. It's
you could work on that.
Yeah, we have really good experts on climate change working here at the Baker Institute. So, but that's
I didn't know that was still a thing.
So Your bio is very impressive.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself. How did you get involved in venture capital in the first place?
Like most of the things I've done, it was not intentional. I got involved in venture capital after being an entrepreneur, actually, and I had helped with some other folks build a company in the behavioral health world, and the health services company that had been pretty successful, which was great. My original plan was to be a political journalist, and I failed miserably at getting to that goal. But I fell into healthcare early. I helped build this company. We took it public, and then I built it to be pretty good size and sold it. And when we had really bootstrapped that company most of the way. And so when we sold it, ultimately, a couple of my partners said, we should start a venture fund focused on the same philosophical approach we used in this company. And I said, great, what's a venture fund? Does that involve math? I don't do math. But we did do that. I mean, it was really, we did have a philosophical approach at this company, which at the time was really sort of heretical, which was, if you do things really well clinically, it costs less money. The quality and lower cost are a thing that can go together. But at the time, it's back in the 90s, that was not thought to be true. But it turns out it is true. And we started a venture fund back then to invest in companies around that idea.
So interesting. Your first experience, did you have any experience in mental health?
No, just my own, such as it is. No, it was interesting. I had a couple years working in the tech world on things that have nothing to do with healthcare. And I got introduced to the entrepreneur who had started this company. He was a psychologist. And I was really a marketing and product person, maybe sales. And the person who introduced us says, you don't know anything about healthcare. He doesn't know anything about sales, marketing, and product development. You'll be perfect for each other. And in a way, that was true. It was I was sort of unfettered by knowing too much. And he, really didn't have those skills. He was a clinical founder, a brilliant guy. And, and it was not just the two of us, there were many people involved. But we had a very, interesting eclectic mix of people in that company that did not all come from the mental health world. Yeah. But it worked.
And that's interesting because when I go to the GE Ventures webpage and I look at the different companies, you can go up there and look at the companies that you're working with. I didn't see anything in mental health. So you really kind of, maybe there is one because there were so many different companies listed on there, but you just branched out from there. It wasn't as if you said, well, I will do this.
When we were investing in my old fund, the thinking was that you could really apply this theory of improving quality, aligning financial incentives, et cetera, to all of medicine. It wasn't just about mental health and substance abuse. So yeah, pretty early on started branching out into other categories. We've been looking at mental health and substance abuse related companies at GE Ventures. It's an area of great interest to us. We just haven't found the right one yet for us. But I think, it's fundamentally one of the most important areas of healthcare, because if you go and look at the research, and a lot of it's been around for a long time, you see that depression, anxiety, some of the other mental health conditions, and certainly substance abuse, probably drive 50 to 60% of the cost on the medical side. So if you can really treat these things well together, you can dramatically improve both outcome and cost.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Let me switch gears. I will come back to some of the things you're discussing later. Can you tell us a bit about what the trends are in the industry? What's hot and new? What is the
in the healthcare investment side, you mean?
Healthcare investment, yeah.
Well, I think the area that's probably got some of the most interesting new activity is the area around the confluence of technology and pharma. So, it's so interesting in healthcare. I've been fortunate enough to work around the services side, the IT side, the pharma side, and the med tech side. And I don't think that's that common for people to have experience in all the different parts. And it used to be that they never talked to each other, ever. I mean, you never knew. If you were a health services person, you did not know pharma people or med tech people, and vice versa. And those worlds have changed dramatically. The confluence and the sort of the connectivity between all of these categories, is fundamentally changed. It was the confluence of activity, and particularly that intersection of pharma and tech, more so than med tech and tech, is really starting to take off, and including the services side. So this whole convergence thing, I think, is quite interesting.
So how is the combination of pharma and tech different from, say, just pharma R&D, which of course is gigantic?
So for pharma R&D, traditionally it's been very science oriented, right? You find a target through some magical scientific means and work on it for a while until it works or doesn't work. But what there wasn't was a lot of focus on how do you bring technologies to create better ways of doing clinical trials, better methods of discovery, using AI to discover, potential targets, for instance, using technology to manage even all the way up through the supply chain of cell therapy as we bring these new therapies online. How do they get delivered effectively? So I think, how do you target drugs better? Once somebody's sick, how do you use technology to identify what course of treatment is right for somebody? And I think there's growing interest in all of those areas, just tremendous growing interest. I think we'll see it next cross over to the med tech side. There's been some of that. In digital health, we've seen the confluence of devices and sensors. But most of that's been done by not big med tech companies. It's mostly been done by small startups who have cajoled, threatened, and otherwise begged big med tech companies to work with them. But now I think we're starting to see the big med tech companies go, oh wait, that sensor thing, that might matter. And to think about even some of the big med tech companies are thinking about services that they can provide. So it is different. It's a move. I mean, if you went to the average pharma company even 3 or 4 years ago, there would not be a data scientist in the building at all. Mm-hmm. And now they're thinking about how do we use data and technologies to change the way we do business.
Right. So what sort of entrepreneurs get into this business? Would they be the people who were just doing straight pharma R&D before? Do they need significant resources in labs?
Not always.
No?
Not always. I mean, I think we see all kinds of people coming into this field, people that aren't from healthcare at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is always interesting. People who have experience, but more from the tech and services side a lot of times. I mean, the pharma people too. I mean, thinking about the ones who are very creative and innovative, thinking about how to make the processes better. Mm-hmm. It's really a mix. I mean, there's, it's been so interesting the last few years of investing, maybe the last 5 or 6 years in particular. You see a lot of non-healthcare people starting companies and coming to healthcare, having been successful in the tech world, and saying, oh, wait, there's that whole big healthcare thing over there that is really screwed up, and maybe somebody new should come in and fix that thing. And it's been an interesting phenomenon, I think. Because on the one hand, there's some truth to that. There's fresh eyes and fresh knowledge about technology that can come in and look at things differently. And on the other hand, healthcare is so crazy and arcane and complex that if you don't have an understanding of how it works, you are dead in the water.
Right.
So this, the companies that have managed to find the hybrid of people and experiences, I think, are the ones that are doing the most interesting things.
Yeah. So we have a program in our bioengineering department. It's called Rice 360, and it's led by Rebecca Richards-Cordum, who was a finalist in the MacArthur 100 and change, the competition for $100 million too. And she was doing work, new technologies to save babies. And so we have this whole set of bioengineers who my impression is they go over the medical center and they talk with doctors and say, what is it are you having problems trying to do? And what do you want us to build to solve that problem? Is that what happens? Sort of these tech people go and...
Sometimes. I mean, it ranges from, everything from that, where they're just really focused on problem first and then build a solution, which is probably the right way to do things, to, people whose grandma got sick and they suddenly had a revelation about how to change the healthcare system. And I don't mean to flip about it. I mean, obviously those are real experiences, but, it's a really broad array of interesting. The ideas are coming out everywhere. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I don't dismiss it at all because that's the way a lot of our legislation happens because there's a member of Congress who, someone in their family gets sick and then suddenly there's a bill.
Yeah, I know.
So I can see that. You recently wrote a blog about digital health.
Oh, yeah.
And could you talk about that?
Sure.
More in terms of, how promising is all,
So, so my blog is called Venture Valkyrie, if anybody wants to look it up. I've been writing there for probably more than 10 years now. Digital health is such an interesting topic to me because, first of all, I think the terminology itself, just the phrase digital health, is really silly and shouldn't really be used, although I still use it all the time because I'm lazy. But it just means the application of technology to health, right? We don't call it digital banking or digital manufacturing. We just call it banking. But I think, people are still so amazed that we can apply technology to healthcare that we've got this funny little term. And it really started more with a lot of the consumer-facing things, a lot of the, Fitbit-y looking things, spread more to some of the diagnostics and other types of products and services. And now it encompasses anything that ever, walked near a semiconductor or a sensor of any kind, or had AI or machine learning or whatever. So it's every kind of software now seems to be called digital health. The blog I wrote was about both the disappointment and the promise of that whole concept, because I think, we've seen an escalation in funding of things called digital health like nothing anybody has ever seen. Just this, it went from something like, I think that in the numbers are, in 2010, there was $300 million invested in things that you'd call digital health. And in the last year, it was like $8 billion. So in that short time frame, 8-year time frame or 7-year time frame, it's just, And the vast majority of the companies that are in that funding category have not succeeded. They have not proven to be useful. They have not proven to be a good investment. They have not proven to be anything, frankly. And then there's some that are, some really good ones. But it's a minority. And I think the discipline of company creation and how easy it is to start a company now, it didn't used to be so easy. All you need now is like an iPad and a Starbucks card, right? And you can start a company. And some friend that will buy your first pilot from you. And so the discipline of the work needed to really understand product market fit and, user centered design and input has not been done in a way that should be done. And so I think the good stuff gets lost in the bad stuff. And a lot of tech people, investors, the people you see on that TV show Silicon Valley. Does anybody watch that show Silicon Valley? It's the best show ever.
Okay.
Those people, who are allegedly my peers in venture capital, have rushed in to invest. And there's a lot of not great stuff. And, so I think thinking critically about what is a good idea and also what is a good investment, and they're not always the same thing. It's been tough.
Okay, so startups are inherently risky. Do you think that on average now that there's too much out there in this particular field relative to other investment opportunities in healthcare? I
do. I think, if I had $1 for every population health company I have seen in the last 10 years, I would be sitting on my yacht right now, somewhere. There are too many companies that are too narrowly focused who get to $3 million, $4 million in revenue and never beyond, because they're just doing, too small of things, or there's too many of them and it's hard to discern what's the good one and what's the not good one, so people don't. And the buying cycles, a lot of you, how many people here are from TMC in one way or another, health system people? Like you guys know who you are. It takes you a long time to buy stuff, right? And so I think a lot of the entrepreneurs don't appreciate the complexity of the selling process and the long time it takes, to get through the selling process. And a lot of these organizations who justifiably want to see evidence that the thing does something. It produces returns and savings, produces better clinical outcome, whatever, produces more revenue, but something evidentiary, that proves it's worthy of investment. Not just venture investment, but vendor investment. And there's not been enough attention to that side.
So how much of this do you think the idea wasn't good in the first place, and how much is it that they executed poorly?
I don't know. 100% of both, probably. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to parse that. I mean, great management can turn, straw into gold sometimes. But I think a lot more work. I think entrepreneurs need to do a lot more work on the front end than they often do. Making sure there's really a good thing there, a real opportunity that's differentiated. Because I think it's very hard for us as venture capital people, and I know you feel super sorry for us, but it's very hard for us to listen to sort of the company after company that says kind of the same thing, that really hasn't done any work investing in proving their value proposition. And really, I wish I was sitting on my yacht with the dollars I would have received asking people, how many patients have you actually talked to? Or how many providers have you actually talked to? Oh, none, 2, things like that. Or if you're in a product, position, normally you're talking about 100 that you should be talking to before you really commit your product build. So it's complicated, and I think it's expensive and hard, and I think that's what it's supposed to be.
Right. You also mentioned that for companies that potentially have something that needs FDA approval, you were talking about how many actually go through the process.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I think companies are much too leery and afraid of FDA. I mean, some companies don't need it, obviously, if they're in administrative functions or whatever, workflow or things that aren't clinical, doesn't matter. But for companies that are going to touch the clinical side of patient care in one way or another, and they're figuring out how to bend over backwards to avoid getting an FDA approval or making it overly simple, I think it's a terrible mistake. Because I think it makes it difficult for physicians or nurses or anybody clinical to believe that it's a good idea. I think it's a differentiator to have proven your product can make it through that process. And yes, it's longer and more expensive, no doubt about it. But, who among us would take a drug that hadn't gone through the FDA? Only the ones that took way too many drugs early on in life. And I don't think, if you're going to use a technology or a service or whatever to make clinical decisions, they should be validated. And I think that's right.
Okay, so I'm thinking at least some of the people in the audience are coming tonight because they're interested in investing. And you explain things so clearly that I'm beginning to think, this is pretty straightforward. I think I can go out and do this. You need to sort of figure out, can you get FDA approval? Do you have something that works? Do you go out and talk with patients and doctors? What am I missing?
The people, the leadership. I mean, in the end, it's the leadership of these companies that make the difference. Their sort of entrepreneurial culture, their leadership style, their ability to be scrappy and,
So in
make
your
things
job,
happen.
You're able to go figure this out?
Well, I claim to. It doesn't always work, I mean, it's the hardest part, honestly. I mean, I think is you can usually have a decent idea if something's a good idea. You can do the math to figure out if something has the potential to be a good investment, but the people part is hard. You got to spend time with them and, give them the virtual colonoscopy, that you would give to a potential spouse sometimes, because you're going to spend more time with them than you are with your spouse. Wow. And you're going to sit next to these people in a boardroom for like 8 or 9 years, more or less, in healthcare. And you don't always make the right decision. People sometimes, how it is, not every marriage lasts, So that's a very hard part of the process, as trying to understand whether the people, who are running the company really have what it takes. And sometimes they really do at a certain point in time, and they need to be different at a different point in time. And some people manage to make it all the way through, and sometimes it's very hard to predict which ones those will be. So.
And do you think someone who is good in one part of healthcare can make it as a successful leader in another part of healthcare or another industry, or?
Probably. I mean, I think leadership is a more complicated skill than learning a new area of healthcare. I mean, if I can learn stuff, no anybody can, I think. But I think that leadership thing, that culture thing, is really, it's innate. The people either have it or they don't. It's hard to learn.
Yeah. So one of the things we do, as part of Ignite, is wonder how is it that Palo Alto is so successful in biotech?
It's the Tesla density, I think that's the difference.
We've got lots of Teslas here. Surprisingly, a surprising number of Teslas, I think, sort of driving around the roads.
Oh, then you're definitely bound to be obnoxious and arrogant before long here.
We're good at being obnoxious and arrogant, too. It's not as if you've spent a lot of time in Houston, but we've got this terrific Texas Medical Center across the street, 50 different institutions. MD Anderson alone is over $4 billion a year in revenue. So we have the capital here. We have the know-how. Could you talk a little bit about, what do we need to we don't have the biotech investment?
Well, I think,
maybe some thoughts on
ecosystems, whatever type they are, take a long time to build. And whether you're talking about the rainforest or the entrepreneurial ecosystem, they take a long time to develop. And if you look today in the Bay Area, which may have peaked at this point, it's gotten so expensive to build a company there. You see people who've come up through the ranks of the first wave of healthcare companies like Genentech. They're not the first wave, but the first wave of sort of new healthcare companies, after the pharmaceutical companies, and some of the med tech companies, like Guidant, that was the ACS division that was out there. I mean, if you look at the management teams of Guidant and the sort of next levels down, those people are now all CEOs. Same with Genentech, they're all CEOs. That's 30 years, 25 years later, right? And so there's been 25, 30 years of building this healthcare ecosystem out there that spawned just, entrepreneur after entrepreneur, which become mentor after mentor. There's also a large healthcare system, hospital system, out there, multiple ones. But it's more diverse than that. There's also pharma and med tech and tech. And so there's this juicy cocktail of all sorts of different kinds of people. And there has been a commitment by the state and by the local communities to really foster and support the development of the startup community for years, right? And it started with the tech world and Apple and all these companies, but it's lived far beyond that. And I think it's as much a cultural thing as it is a happenstance thing that the companies were there. So I think if you look at a community that's thriving for healthcare innovation, they've got lots of educational institutions, they've got lots of different kinds of healthcare institutions, not just one kind. They've got very densely populated urban centers, which you have here, which is good. They have very strong intellectual and cultural diversity, which is necessary, I think, for great healthcare ecosystems. They have a large capital base. Now that you have capital here, it's just not in this segment, right? But in California, it is. A lot of the money that was made early on, people at Genentech and Affymetrix and some of these other companies, was made in the healthcare system and was thus returned to the healthcare system because people are comfortable putting their money in what they know a lot of times, right? And so a lot of venture funds that were funded by healthcare people, a lot of companies that were then funded by healthcare angels, the people who started these other companies and made money. And I think, they all have contributed to making the environment very prosperous. I think that pool of experienced people and that pool of sort of cultural orientation to innovation is really important, that piece. And that has to be nurtured over a long period of time.
That's interesting, because I think we were thinking Oh, it's because we don't have Apple and Google here, and that's why we're at a disadvantage.
Well, that's part of it, because they're part of that cultural ecosystem, that sponsors those companies. It's funny, I remember my first job out of college was at this company called Regis McKenna. And Regis McKenna, who happens to be a guy, a person, who was it was a company that did marketing for tech companies. It was sort of he was one of the first famous, tech marketing guys. And this company, he personally helped start Apple, and he personally helped start Intel, and he was part of that soup, right? And we would have these new companies come in and want to use us for their marketing and public relations and product, support stuff. And they'd come in with funny names like Google or AOL or whatever. You never heard of them before, and they were little nothings. But you could build such a wealth of resources around them, because there were so many people interested in doing that in the area. And a lot of these companies went on to be, Google and AOL, right? And Facebook and companies like that. So it is partly that, and a lot of those companies created wealth that led to venture funds, and venture funds growing and diversifying. Led to the companies like, the other healthcare companies that were formed. So I think it takes a lot of that recycling time. And, in an environment that, if you're in the Bay Area and you're not in the entrepreneurial world, you're kind of weird. Like, really? You're not paying for your gas with stock options? That's so weird. But here, I think it's weird if you are in that world more. You're more accustomed to being in a different part of the economy. So, I think it takes time to change that mindset.
Change that psyche. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. The other thing is we do have plenty of wealth and energy.
Sure.
And I have to believe, in terms of oil and gas, that some of our investors, should be realizing, the ROI is not going to be as lucrative 20 years down the road as it could be in health.
Yeah.
Do you ever have those sorts of discussions with some of the energy investors at GE, or?
Well, we don't really do it that way at GE. We have different little silos, so there's the oil and gas guys invest in oil and gas, and the healthcare people invest in healthcare and the like.
So there is no.
So, we're all in the same organization. We talk to each other, but we have sort of specialty orientation. But I can tell you that the oil and gas side of things is not as lucrative as it once was. It's not as easy for us to do deals there, not for lack of interest, but for lack of opportunity. That's going to have a good payoff. And so there is definitely more energy, quote unquote, focused on healthcare, and some of the other categories, software, and more opportunities to cross-collaborate there. Yeah. So I think, if you were going to try to start an oil and gas focused venture fund right now, you would have a very hard time doing that, no matter where you were, in Texas or anywhere else.
Yeah.
So.
Though I have to, all this venture investing has raised the cost of housing, so it's unaffordable.
Oh, true. It's so true.
But certainly it's had some sort of community benefits, right? And,
absolutely. Community benefits are, everybody's got an education, right? It's just this, community benefit and community deficit. Community benefit is, the incredible sort of rise in economic, success in the area, the opportunities and the job opportunities. One of the things that California did really well is create a massive incentive for people to be in engineering and computer science and those fields which you need to build a startup economy, including in healthcare. So it's not just medical schools that you need, technology schools, and the schools we have out there spend a great amount of energy building those kind of people. So they're pouring out of Stanford, they're pouring out of Berkeley, they're pouring out of all the universities in that area. And so that's great. On the downside, you do have, crazy housing, shortages. The cost of living and the cost of hiring people is become impossible. I mean, my daughter just graduated from college, as Aisha said, and
What'd she major in?
She majored in psychology and consumer behavior. And she wants to go work in the field of product development, product stuff for children. And she was very fortunate to get a job at IDEO, which is a really cool, product design kind of firm that does super cool stuff. And it's like as Palo Alto as you can get. I mean, they have like, hipster office and they have a chef, it's ridiculous. Anyways, but I panicked. I said, oh, that's great, you're gonna work at IDEO. Where the hell are you gonna live? Because you can't live in Palo Alto as a 22-year-old person on a, frankly, pretty decent salary, but for a 22-year-old person.
Yeah.
And my God, how do you feel about the gutter? Because that's where you're gonna be, And, we had to go find some creative housing solutions, which we found, which were great. But you can't just rent an apartment. It costs $5,000 a month to rent a crappy little apartment, So it's created a lot of pressure for people to leave. So people are leaving, California. To hire some of the really best data scientists, you're going to pay them $500,000. And if you're a startup company, that was your whole Series A round. You can't do that. So it's getting very hard, I think, to start some of these companies and run them in the Bay Area because the costs have become so insane. So it is an opportunity, I think, for other places to steal, right? And places have, like Seattle, have really taken a lot of folks from California, Denver, but it's a real opportunity for places like Houston and Austin, I think.
Right. Yeah, I have a friend who drove over to California last year to pick his son up because he was working as a firefighter in Palo Alto, and he got tired of sharing a small apartment with 3 other firefighters.
Exactly.
So yeah, very common situation.
They're out there putting out Tesla fires on Highway 101.
What do you drive?
Not a Tesla.
Okay.
I'm just teasing though. I don't really care.
Oh no, it's fascinating. I have discussions at home about this, so it's interesting, that company, but that's not the subject of tonight. What do you think of the valuations of some of these biotech companies? Are they realistic? Are we in a bubble?
Well, not just biotech and all of healthcare, the valuations are crazy high. I keep saying they're going to explode any day now. The bubble's going to break, but I seem to be wrong because it keeps going up. I do think we are starting to see a divergence in valuations. So sort of the super awesome, amazing companies that have proven something are still going straight up, still stupid. And the ones that are sort of not quite doing that are coming down, like gravity works. But those are not necessarily the ones you want to invest in, right? But on the other hand, these things have become, they may be great ideas, but they're not necessarily great investments anymore because the valuations are so high. Because if you look at, if you think about digital health companies, for instance, quote unquote, most of those companies that have exited, and there haven't been many, have exited for under $100 million. So if their valuation is over $100 million, math says you lose money, Maybe a great idea, but it's a bad company to invest in. So it's hard to select those sometimes and to guess, and you're wrong 50% of the time, which ones will live up to their valuation. And you see something like Flatiron, which got sold to Roche recently for $2 billion, and you think, so I got an investment in another company that looks a lot like Flatiron, which we do. Is that worth $2 billion? God, I hope so. But I never would have guessed that before I heard that announcement, And you can't really count on that, anti-gravity thing happening forever. You have to be rational in your investment profile. So I think it is tough right now to deploy capital, really, really hard, which makes other cities more appealing. Because I met with a company today here in Houston, which is had a really interesting idea, and their expectations for their pre-money value for raising money was really low. And I said, really? Wow, that sounds like a good deal. And even if they get sold for $20 million, you could make money. And I think that has to be taken into account.
Well, if you saw anything today you thought was promising, we would love to have your participation.
We're going to follow up on it.
Here.
Yeah, no, we're definitely interested in finding companies outside of Silicon Valley and outside of Boston. We are in those two locations, and it's where my team is half in Boston, half in San Francisco area, and most of our investments probably are in those locations. But like whenever we see something from here or Nashville or Denver, we're excited because the prices are better and the competition is lower.
Yeah, interesting. All right, I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to open up to our audience because generally they have very good questions. So I'm sure it'll be a fascinating discussion. This is beyond our particular topic, but you seem to understand healthcare very well, and we're all wondering about this. So Amazon and J.P. Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway have decided that they're going to jump in and fix the healthcare system for all of us. I'm waiting with anticipation. I'm wondering what your feelings are. Do you think this is going to have an impact? Do you think they can do things in terms of sort of new innovations that we haven't thought of already?
I have such a complex set of feelings about this. On the one hand, you got to be kind of an idiot to bet against Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos. I mean, they seem to have done all right. On the other hand, I actually don't think they're trying to fix the healthcare system. I think they're trying to make it reasonable to spend money on healthcare for their employees, and by doing so, help other employers, which is not the same thing as changing the healthcare system fundamentally, but it is cutting out a lot of middlemen and a lot of craziness. And I think they could do that. They have the buying power. They have shown the ability to understand markets and consumers and buyers and to build technologies that enable people to have a good consumer experience. I mean, how many people in here use Amazon? Almost 100%, right? And, how many people are excited to go to the hospital? Yeah, exactly my point. So, I think it's worthy of note. I think they'll do something interesting. The smart thing they've done is hired lots of good healthcare people. I know a lot of people who've gotten hired by those guys that are really good people. So they're not trying to fix the healthcare system with people who've never been in it before.
Yeah.
I think that the merger that's much more interesting and is worth watching and probably is fundamentally capable of changing the healthcare system is the Walmart, Humana, Kindred one. I think that could change everything about the healthcare system, or most everything. Because you could, if you squint and look sideways a little bit, you could see how they're going to fundamentally alter how people access the healthcare system. Something like 85% of Americans spent money at Walmart in the last year, either in person or online. And Humana is the largest insurer of Medicare members, the older population where most of the cost is. And Kindred is one of the largest home care providers. And if you're an insurance company that wants to move care out of the hospital and into the home, and you own a great home care provider, and you own and are part of an organization that's got front-end clinics that Walmart has many, many, many provider clinics that are pretty good for basic stuff. And also they've been buying up healthcare practices left and right, quietly, hundreds of them. So they're building the world's largest outpatient healthcare system, second only to or equal to the one that United Healthcare is building, quietly, buying up practices, outpatient surgical centers. Those are going to be the two largest outpatient providers in America, I think. And if you consider that most people would rather be treated in their home, and many people can and should be treated in their home, or at outpatient clinics, or at outpatient surgical centers, and you also have the insurance plan that decides what network you can go to and who'll get paid and who won't, you have a lot of market power.
Right.
And you can turn around and you don't have the expense and overhead of the hospitals, right? And you can turn around to the hospitals and say, I don't need that much of your stuff frankly, and here's what I'm willing to pay for it. Take it or leave it. And I think it's scary. I think it should be scary for a lot of the health systems.
Yeah.
And I think that could be a fundamental change.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, as a health economist looking at antitrust issues, need to get to work.
Yeah, I don't think this is your administration for that one. I think they're going to allow a lot of these things to happen.
All right, so we're ready to open this up to questions. What we're going to do is Brenda has a mic, and so if you could wait until and Mara, they have mics. So hold up your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and then so everyone can hear.
Perfect segue on the Walmart. I have two questions for you, Lisa. One, as you pointed out, most healthcare institutions are executing a blockbuster video model in a Netflix world. So now that you have these kind of dynamics with Walmart and you have the consumers pushing, what is the effect of the consumer to really kind of tip innovation, or at least the model moving to a more virtualized care to the hospitals? Question one. Question two, I rolled my eyes looking at Draper talking about how Elizabeth Holmes was bullied into submission regarding her venture. But then I paused and said, well, that could be a real thing. Some entrepreneurs are, not saying she was, but some are kind of, there's a lot of expectations. So how do you suggest that entrepreneurs manage expectations and are not moved too fast or bullied into a position that Elizabeth Holmes found herself in?
Well, I wasn't privy to the actions at Theranos, but I don't, you can't be bullied into lying. You can choose to lie or not to lie, right? And I think in general, forgetting that particular weird situation, I think entrepreneurs have to select their teams, including their investors, very carefully. There has to be a lot of trust. There has to be a lot of understanding of how complicated it is. And a lot of shared forgiveness about expectations and truth and transparency. Nothing makes investors more annoyed than lack of transparency and sudden shocking revelations that are bad. But when you know bad things are going to happen or you understand what happened, you go, okay, now what do we do about it? And you work together to figure it out. So I think it's important to think about your investors and your board as your family. Who would you pick to be in your family if you weren't forced to be stuck in the family you're in? And build a team around you that is in your boat, with you, not standing outside hoping, or waiting to throw you overboard. On the first question, which is a really complicated question on consumers' impact on innovation, I think in healthcare, by and large, consumers don't give a damn about healthcare. Unless they're sick, really sick. And I mean sick like cancer sick, or they have a sick child, and mostly otherwise they don't mostly think about it that much. And they aren't the primary drivers of innovation in healthcare, so much as cost and sort of crisis are of the healthcare, or opportunity for the healthcare enterprises. I do think that the thing that consumers impact is they vote with their money and their feet when they have to. And if they can get an experience that's more like Walmart or Amazon and less like, the average payer or provider, they will take it. And so I think if you present them with a better experience, and it might be a better experience at a health system, if you go to I can't speak to the ones here because I don't know them as well, but if you go to Cleveland Clinic, they treat you pretty well when you walk through the door. And so I think the consumer's facility with communications and mobile and growing comfort with virtual visits and things like that will change the way healthcare is delivered, but I'm not sure they're the driver of most of that. I don't think so.
To tack on to that, so I've been in the healthcare industry my whole career, working with academic medical centers and global consulting firms, and then I actually did work for the CEO of Humana, who ran the largest oncology network, and we were doing things like looking at cancer care journeys in 2006. We were doing data analytics on our drugs way back then. I think that's kind of led him to his vision today. Yeah. But this is not an easy industry. And I'm brought in when there's significant pain points. And I think it's because call it the old system, current system we just talked about, because that was a great question in terms of consumerism. But the incentive structure has been misaligned. So do you see startups failing because of lack of understanding of the misalignment? And what I'm talking about is payers are publicly traded, accountable to their stakeholders, med device, biotech, pharma, accountable to stakeholders, publicly traded, and you have a lot of not-for-profit, prestigious academic medical centers that are delivering amazing, life-saving surgeries and treatments, and we'd all want to be there if we got to that point. But how many startups are you seeing fail? And then the other question I was going to ask was about, are there any Ubers in healthcare? But I think you already said that with the whole Kindred dynamic. So.
Well, Uber has a healthcare division. So that is
yikes.
Yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand the confusing dynamics and misaligned incentives of healthcare. But I would tell you that it's more about financial misalignment that's about how people get paid than it is the shareholder issue so much. I mean, it's tangentially that, I guess. But I mean, health systems, by and large, and we can talk about value-based care all we want, but it's kind of BS because 90+% of healthcare is still fee-for-service. And so, let's be honest with ourselves, most health systems, no matter how good they are, clinically, are incented to do more stuff, charge for more things, do more volume. And I think a lot of companies, particularly the ones that sprung up, the huge crop that sprung up after the ACA and continue to spring up like bunnies, come in with a story about what they're going to do for the value-based world. And you look at them and you say, what value-based world? There's like, 5 guys that care about that. And granted, there are Medicare, HMOs or ACOs that do care about that, and there's some other similarly situated payer provider types of things, but they're pretty rare, frankly. And we were talking to an entrepreneur today who was talking about how he was going to cut the number of procedures in the cardiology department at healthcare systems, and I said, that's not going to go over well. Because that's their only profitable division in most of these places, They want to do more stuff in the cardiology department. He looked at me like, oh, shit, And so that's the problem that I see a lot, is that misunderstanding of sort of how everybody's kind of in two boats, this value thing, which we talk about, and this volume thing, which we do. And will we ultimately shift more there? Yeah, I think we will ultimately shift more there. I'm not sure my mic is going on and off here. But we're a long way from there. And I think people often don't understand how money flows through the healthcare system, how some surgeries are DRGs, and their product, if it's really expensive, makes the DRG not profitable anymore, and all that kind of arcane bullshit that we need to know, to sell products in our field. And that's why it's so important, I think, for healthcare people to be alongside tech people when they start these companies, so people understand both sides of the opportunity.
Deborah Mansfield here. Thank you, Vivian, and thank you, Lisa. Just like Air Liquide wants to be involved with everything that touches gases, GE is electrons, and so data is all about that. So can you give us the vision where GE is going per healthcare? Because everyone knows that the startup has to identify the strategic partner that's going to help them get to the healthcare organization. And we look to GE as being one of those partners. So can you give us the look to the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can give you a good look, and I think Karen Murphy, who runs our healthcare business, could do a better job of it. But, I think GE's real interest in a in a very simple nutshell, is the advancement of precision health. And by precision health, we mean getting the right care and the right information, using the right data to figure out the right care, and the right process to get it to the right people, right, in the right amount. And we only play in some parts of that world. We play heavily in the sort of pharma, bioprocessing, manufacturing, outsourcing world to help pharma, deliver better products. We play heavily in the health IT world and in the imaging world. And so to the extent we're trying to build up all the connectivity between those things to reach that precision health goal. And that is really the general theme of where we're headed. And to the extent that products and services can advance that objective, we're interested in them.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Good.
So I'm one of the, like you said, the people that doesn't fit in Houston yet because I'm an entrepreneur, so trying to fit in. So my question is more regarding the venture capital side. So I have a company, but we always wonder, like you said, trying to find the right person. But one question that always bothered me, or actually she always wonder about, is are venture capital companies willing to wait for a company to grow, and how long, because of the return on investment? So that's the one thing that's always stopped me from saying, okay, should we even consider talking to someone or not? And the other part is always the scary part of, should we even tell anyone what we're doing because someone else is going to do it? And from your face, I can tell you get that question quite a bit.
What you're doing is so easily copied that anybody can do it. You're doing the wrong thing. Okay?
Agree with that.
And IP, intellectual property, in health IT services is meaningless. It's all about execution. So, I wouldn't get overly concerned. So I'm going to give you the short and the long answer to your venture capital question. The short answer is absolutely. I think venture capitalists understand it takes a long time. The average healthcare company, from beginning to exit, is about 10 years, sometimes 12. We venture capitalists, depending on where we all invest at different stages of the process. So some do seed stage investments, some do, commercial stage investments, some do growth investments. It depends on who you're talking to, right? So you need to understand who you're talking to and what their threshold is. I mean, if you're talking to me, we're looking for companies that have revenue and that are likely to exit in 5-6 years, which, doesn't always work out. That's an average. So we have some companies in our portfolio that have been there 10 years and some that have been there a year, and in the end it'll average out, we hope, to 5 or 6. If you're talking to somebody who's a seed stage investor in healthcare and who's a sophisticated investor, they should understand that it takes a long time. However, you have to, when you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for venture investors, you have to do your due diligence on them as people and them as funds. So ask them questions about that. If they're going to do due diligence on you, you should do due diligence on them. And not just by asking them, but talking to the entrepreneurs they've backed in the past and how patient were they about helping your company, and how helpful were they in helping the company grow. You also have to understand where they are in their fund cycle. So most of the funds are 10-year things. This is different for corporate funds like mine. It's sort of an evergreen thing. As long as GE's there, it's there, whatever. But the independent venture funds, they have a lifespan. Each fund has 10 years, let's call it. If they're investing in year 8 in you, you should be concerned that they have only a couple more years to be thinking about that particular fund. And if you're not a late stage company, that's not a good match. So you really have to learn, the intricacies of the particular fund you have. What's the reserve policy they have? How much money are they going to hold for you downstream when you grow? How long are they going to be around? Yada, yada, all that. And how have they worked with their other companies? That's your best source of information.
Thanks very much for your talk. Back on the cost side and the fee-for-service comment you made, in your opinion, how much of an issue in the U.S. healthcare system is both the largely employer-provided or employer-insured pools and the tax deductibility of most healthcare payments, and if those are barriers to really bending the cost curve aside from other startups and technology.
I'm not 100% sure what you're asking me. Are you asking me if it's a good thing that employers pay for insurance?
Correct. And that there's tax deductibility in our
Right.
in when I pay for a fee for a service.
So I mean, is it better that employers do or don't pay for health? Well, the number one payer of healthcare in America is the government.
Right.
60%, more or less, of healthcare is paid for by the government, federal or state. 40% of healthcare is paid for by employers. The alternative to that is single payer, I guess, which we're, tipping, not single payer, but we're tipping towards government payer. I don't know if it's better or worse, frankly. I think what's more important is aligning the incentives of the patients, the payers, and the providers better under whatever structure it functions, whatever the tax structure is and all the rest. The tax structure plays into that alignment of incentives, right? Whether you like or don't like the ACA, the tax structure behind it was meant to help align incentives. I don't know if it worked or not, but whatever. That was an attempt at that. And so I think that's the more important issue. If you look at countries where it is single payer or where it's private pay or whatever, they all have problems. They all have problems. One of our biggest problems is we pay more than anybody else for every unique thing, right? Every device, every drug, everything costs more here than it does anywhere else in the world because of our regulations and what we can and can't negotiate about and what we will and won't negotiate about. And I think that's a more complicated issue. Yeah.
What do y'all look for? You mentioned, kind of touched on it previously, but what are some of your investment dollars and what you look for?
Okay, so we look for things that are sort of next generation diagnostics and treatments, whether they're digital or otherwise, but we don't invest in drugs. We don't invest in molecules and things like that. We invest in primarily companies that are revenue stage, early revenue stage, or later. So we don't invest in seed stage. We don't invest in pre-revenue companies with extremely rare exception, and those exceptions are only in the like the precision health, life science side of things. Like for instance, we have invested in like a sequencing company. Okay, that's not yet on the market. That's a very rare exception for us. And we invest $3 to $5 million initially in companies. So again, if you're raising $3 million, we're not a good candidate because we like to invest with others in the syndicate. And we like to take board seats and be engaged. And we then, over the course of time, will invest, say, up to $15 million in a company, in subsequent rounds, to get to a total of that amount, things like that. So we invest in life science tools. We invest in things that improve operational and administrative efficiency of organizations. In healthcare, we invest in new models of clinical delivery and in new methods of diagnosis and treatment, which sound like very broad and sweeping categories, and they are. And I could be more specific, but it's kind of like we know it when we see it. We look for things that have some strategic interest to GE, whether or not we're going to buy them ever. We don't buy most of these companies, but we want to see a story and understand a story about why it's strategically relevant to the company. Low valuation, high return. That's the number one category we look for. But kind of the usual stuff. Great management, great idea, aching need to be solved, not 750 companies trying to solve it together, in the categories that I mentioned. Yeah.
So my question is more, my wife's in bioengineering and academia, and the grant rates keep, getting smaller and smaller, and then even when you get a grant, the money is becoming less and less. And for the type of research they want to do in academia, it's very high risk. And so as that's going to be, drying up more and more in the future, do you think there's going to eventually be a place where like VC firms are going to be trying to generate grants for right of first refusal or things along those lines, where they're going to be, it's not a company, but they're sort of investing in the labs or anything like that?
No, because, well, I think companies will, like GE as a company does occasionally do things like that as partnerships, not as grants. But, let's face it, venture capitalists have one job description. It's like, take this much money and turn it into that much money, right? And the return on investment in research is zero, in the short term. And so, no, I don't. Now, there are really interesting combination venture philanthropy type companies and organizations out there, like the American Heart Association, invests a ton in research, a ton. And also they have a venture fund. And sometimes these things can collaborate. The American Cancer Society invests a ton in research, and they're building a venture fund. And the goal of that venture fund is not to, deliver massive returns that they're going to use in some other way. It's to keep funding innovation. So I think there are these interesting venture philanthropy things that will sort of help fill some of that gap that you're talking about. Yeah.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for coming to Houston.
Kind of hot.
So you talked about the role of GE in precision medicine, and I'm curious to know if you could elaborate on the main challenges and the limitations going forward in this field in precision medicines.
Yeah, precision health, we think of it more broadly than medicine. I think the main challenges, I don't know how much time you got. How do you pay for it? Is there enough data to know how to make good decisions? How do you get it? How do you use new technologies to figure out, the right answers to some of the big questions about treatment? How do you straddle this value-based world in a useful way that improves outcome and reduces cost? I mean, it's kind of the big, hairy questions, right? How do you take images from all of our, billions of dollars of imaging equipment and turn them into data that can improve analytics to help do better reads, and so that can drive better treatment outcomes and the like. So just, all that kind of stuff.
So you talked about the sequencing. So do you see like we have already the tools and the softwares that will allow us really to have a better prediction to learn exactly what's kind of information that we can tease apart to educate the population in terms of what kind of drug or treatment that's appropriate for a certain population?
I have two levels of answer to that question. Right now, today, 50% of all medications prescribed are not taken. Okay? Ones we know that work, blood pressure medicine, stuff like that. Lipitor, basic stuff. Mental health, psychiatric drugs. Stuff we know works for people that they do not take. We have enough data to do something about that. It's hard, so I think it depends on what you're trying to do. We have more data than we need to solve a lot of the problems we have in medicine that are expensive right now. And we don't use it well. More than half the people who have atrial fibrillation are not anticoagulated. It's a frickin' crime, that happens. People have strokes as a result of that. It's well known and documented. It's not even a question in medicine, but that is what happens. At a higher level, do we know enough about genomics and proteomics and microbiomics and God only knows what else omics and everything else to decide if this particular cancer regimen is better than that particular cancer regimen? Probably not. We're getting there. We're doing better. I was telling somebody at MD Anderson earlier today that my brother-in-law had throat cancer a few years ago, and he went to 3 different places to get treatment recommendations, Yale, Sloan Kettering, not crappy places, right? He got 3 completely different recommendations that had no bearing, no relationship to each other. you know, that's terrible. We can do better than that. And there are a lot of, I think, clinical guidelines and data that is getting us better, but we're not there yet. There's a long way to go. So that's my sort of two-part answer. I think the third part of the answer is, I think what we overlook to our discredit as a healthcare system is all the social determinants of health issues that affect treatment outcome. You know, frankly, you know, just getting people to their appointments is half the battle, and a lot of people can't get there because of whatever reason. They're too sick, they don't drive, God knows, you know. Taking care of people's housing. I mean, when I was in mental health, I took care of lots of Medicaid. I personally didn't, I'm not a clinician, but we took care of lots of Medicaid patients, right? And, you know, if you're homeless or you're, you know, so poor that you can't even eat, how are we expecting you to follow a complicated treatment regimen? You gotta help people with the real problems, you know? If you give people food, they can take care of themselves because they're not starving to death, you know? I mean, I think we overlook these things as part of medicine, and it's really stupid. We have enough data about that. We have more data than we'll ever need to know about that. So I think it really, we can do a lot better with what we've got, and there's a lot of opportunity on the science side as well.
We can take one more question.
Okay, so going back to your original topic, I guess, the question, I'm still concerned because I'm a Texan and a taxpayer. So Texas has all of these corporate welfare programs, which under the guise of encouraging innovation, such as the Emerging Technology Fund and even CIPRIT, and that's millions and billions of dollars. And then Houston in particular is now investing in like a Rice in particular, my alma mater, in a campus and downtown. Don't know really what the exact details of that vision are. There's also a new helix structure, which is supposed to be some innovation hub off of Old Spanish Trail. So I just don't see anything changing. I graduated in '94, and you know, woohoo, we're going to be the next biotech hub of the universe. Mm-hmm. They started something in the Woodlands that seems to have failed, and I postdoced at UCSF, so I'm very familiar with the atmosphere there. So, what do you think it's really going to take to make companies like GE take an interest in Houston as opposed to Austin? Because I guess you go to Austin a lot more since they're not 25 in the list, right? So what's it really going to take, do you think?
Well, I think for any city, and again, I can't really comment specifically on Houston per se because I'm not smart enough about the details. Like in any community, just building incubators or accelerators or workspaces is only one piece of the puzzle. You need to also bring in capital. The problem in this city, and like many cities in America, is there's lots of seed capital and there's no second level capital. Zero. Like, so you get your company to a certain point and you're stuck. You either have to attract capital from out of state, where you probably don't have good contacts, or you get told, you know, the investor doesn't want to come there because it's too far away to manage the deal, or you have to leave, you know, and go and move your company somewhere else in order to get that capital. So I think you have to have the workspaces and the sort of creation of these ecosystems. You have to have incentives to create venture funds here as well. You have to have communities that are friendly to entrepreneurs, you know, so not just workspaces, but housing and, you know, fancy coffee places or whatever they like, I don't know. But things that, you know, build on that. You've got to bring in big companies. And Houston's done some of that well with Johnson & Johnson's come here, I know, and others, you know, to participate around TMCX. And so I think you have to do a lot of different things at the same time to build that and give it time. You can't just put a building in the middle of somewhere and say, voila, entrepreneurship, you know. It takes more.
So that was the question I was trying to figure out how to ask. So thank you for asking it, and thank you for such a clear answer. And we could go on all night, but unfortunately, you have a plane to catch so you can get back home. So if you would all join me in thanking Lisa Suennen.
Thank you.
Terrific discussion.
Thank you.